All right. We're live. Okay. How's everybody doing? Well, I hope.
Stressed.
Stressed! The last week of class.
So fun.
Stressed. Okay. Let's see here. Yes, good. Well, today we'll go over the whole semester that we've learned, kind of summarizing everything. And then on Wednesday, we'll take a look at the exam. We'll go over the exam and talk about any questions that you might have and any things that you might want to ask about related to the exam, okay? And let's see. That's it for now. Okay, so let's get signed in. 12. Okay. All right, so before we get there, let's talk about news. Anything in the news of interest? I have stuff, but like, how about you guys? Any newsworthy items that you've seen that are, yes?
They had a concert.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure where for Nelson Mandela's
For his son?
no.
Oh.
Like, I forgot exactly what it was, but they had one in I'm not sure, but it was cool because the tickets you could have purchased them, you had to like earn them. Like,
You had to earn tickets to go to the concert?
Yeah.
How do you earn them?
Like by like service.
Doing community service. Wow, that's amazing. That's interesting. Kind of new. Was that here in California or was that somewhere else?
I'll look it up.
Huh, yeah, send me the link on that. That sounds really interesting. That for tickets to get into events, it's not about money, it's about doing good. That's a different approach completely. All right, okay, so let's see here. Bunch of interesting news. Okay, so anything else? Any other news that you guys have before I jump in? Riots in Paris, yes. Is that what you said? Riots in Paris? Yeah, there are some significant riots in Paris. Let's take a look and see what's going on here. Protesting under Macron turned deadlier. Yellow vests riots in Paris, but their anger is rooted and deep in France. Anybody know about the protesting, what it's about? Taxes, right? And has he gone back on it? Has he said, no, we'll step back? Is there any attempt to mediate or remediate this situation by Macron? Does anybody know? Okay, I haven't been following all of the exact news on France. Assesses the damage in the city's worst riot in a decade, in the last 10 years. Okay, so 133 people injured. Whoa, 400 arrested. Dang. Something to keep an eye on, right? Anti-government riot. That's interesting. Okay. It's like Nicaragua. Anything else?
They're also allowing oil exploration in Alaska wildlife.
ANWR, right? Alaska, first step towards oil, gas drilling in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. Oh, let's see. We've got to have some newer news on this. In the blink of an eye, a hunt for oil threatens pristine Alaska. New York Times. Groups gear up to fight oil and gas development in the Arctic refuge. I wonder if that's going to be an indigenous kind of focused group. What do you think? You think they're going to try and take it from that direction? I think they'd have a lot of success if they took it from the approach of indigenous land rights, yeah, and worked off some of the other aspects, as opposed to just, no, we don't want you to drill there, like our country kind of thing. That might be more difficult. Although, if you took the latter, it would be more of like a general environmentalist kind of a focus. So maybe you get more people involved. I don't know. Right. Just had a big earthquake. What and any small earthquakes? Was there any tsunamis that happened? I know there were probably warnings. What?
I heard one tsunami heading towards Japan.
But any results of it? Not okay. Must have petered out. Did you hear anything about
I heard it.
tsunami?
I heard the mean, there was like cautious with alerts and
Ah.
they called them off.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad about that.
Good thing that nobody was hurt.
Yeah.
Earthquake, but they knew about it
Yeah,
ahead of time.
they did. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. All right. This one I found fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
The scientists surprised everybody. Like even the country, right? Even China. And China responded going, oh no, well, what has this guy done, right? He should have followed the protocols for ethics, right? So he didn't submit this through the protocols for ethics, right? So nobody reviewed the study. What did he do?
Genetically modified a baby.
Twins.
Oh, yeah. Was it just one of them? Though?
Oh, I don't know.
Just one of the twins to resist HIV. I mean, sorry, AIDS.
To make recently born twin girls. Oh, I think it's both of them. Maybe not. Maybe it's a Bloomberg, not, they don't always get the details. So you could be right. It'd be better if they didn't do one of them so then they could see, better for science. So when am I talking about better? This is like, it's hard to talk about this. Yeah. So what did they genetically engineer them for? Do we know? Resistance against HIV. And so now we think that this is pretty tremendous, is pretty amazing violation of ethics because it affects these people in their lives, right? We don't know whether or not this is a measure that's going to stick or that it's going to do exactly what they expect. So it's all experimental, and it's experimental with lives, right? Young babies' lives. The other thing that we're thinking that might be concerning is that now, since we've genetically altered the genes, we've genetically altered all of the future genes for any subsequent offspring, right? So now we've created an offspring pool that is genetically resistant to AIDS.
Apparently, he's gone missing.
He's gone missing.
According to
The scientist has
5
gone
hours
missing.
ago, like,
That doesn't surprise me because everybody was freaking out about it and it just came out, right?
Like, did he flee or?
We don't know. Do we?
I mean, these aren't like the best sources probably, but he's missing after his former employers denied that he was detained over the weekend.
Oh. Let's see. We have U.S. restrictions, germline editing. He did exactly that. Okay, so that was kind of big that came out. Let's see what other things are big right now. All right, hold on. Let's see. Okay. Got a couple of pieces of news with Indigenous land rights. We remember the tenure facility, right? Because we took a look at this as a potential source of funding for some Indigenous groups. Okay. Indigenous territories of the Madre Dios go online. I wish I could get this little thing to click off, but I can't. Okay, so we're just going to deal with it, okay? And so we're talking about a new online medium to be able to record your data and share it as well. So we now have maps that are being produced in a way that we can share it widely, instantly, and have others involved here. So this is kind of a new piece of technology that just came out, okay? Now, Panama recognizes the Nassau ancestral territory. You recognize that name? Kind of.
They're different groups,
This is the Kuna. Yeah.
but the name.
Yep. I do believe they're also in a park. Let's take a look.
Oh yeah, both of the
Amistad International Park
yeah.
and protected forest. So we have a lawyer for the Kuna saying natural resources within the protected areas cannot be used in ways that would encourage or endangered biodiversity. Aha! Parks and people. Now we're back in that problem again. Do you know what UN entity works on that? It's called Man and the Biosphere. MAB, Man and the Biosphere Program. And the program developed primarily because people all of a sudden realized that the parks that they were trying to protect had people in them. And so Man and the Biosphere was a UNESCO kind of project to recognize that there are people there and that they need to do something to help the people. We ran into this with the Mayagna. When we started working with them, only the Nature Conservancy was working with them. So only people associated with environmentalism. Nobody on the human side, right? They said, yeah, we got the whole environmentalism side covered, but what about the human rights side of this? And so it's good that we have some more balancing with that, right? Especially when we have people in protected areas. Okay, so that was another one. Cameroon, really cool here. Releases guidelines and training materials for participatory mapping. Yay, right? Forest Peoples Program, Rainforest Foundation. We got a bunch of things in here, right, that are all involved. Central Africa Network of Parliamentarians. Remember that word, parliamentarians? We've educated them now with our parliamentarian handbooks, and now they're all up on it, right? Participatory development plans. So sounds like they're going to be listening to people. And look at that. It's in English. Yay. Go download it, right? Go download it and check it out and see what you think. I would. Right? Okay, I'm not going to close that because I'm going to go back to it later. All right, this is one that I was thinking would be in line with the other ones that you've looked at. Feds fail to prosecute tribes in Indian country. This was just reported the 29th, right? So last week, we got our 2017 numbers and found out that, oh my gosh, even our country, yeah, we knew it, I think we all knew it, is doing a crappy job in not addressing these issues for Native Americans. So we're not following up on cases. We've got a lot of cases. Look at that photograph. Wow, what a powerful image, huh? Right? Of the cases that went unprosecuted, over a quarter were allegations of sexual assault against children and adults. A quarter. Yeah, we have difficulties in prosecuting those things. We have seen barriers to law enforcement, right? Jurisdictional issues. We even have problems with child abuse that might even be filed differently, right? And taking children away from tribal groups, right? Anybody know about this one? Did you know about this being passed? I wasn't aware of this being passed. 2010, Tribal Law and Order Act, attempting to improve relationship between tribes and the U.S. Attorney's Office, codifying tribal liaisons in Indian country districts. Right? This is where we're trying to support the local Native American courts and their autonomy, but we haven't, obviously, so not doing enough here. We haven't had good access to crime databases either, and in trying to figure out ways to develop some protections. Okay, so not happy about that. Had you seen that? No, new news. Yeah, okay. Boy, we got a lot of information that's just stacking the dice against the United States government. Okay, here's more. See if I can find it. There it is. The Rohingya, right? Here we thought we were done. Oops. Huh. Not sure why we can't get all of that in view. We'll just kind of pull it over. All right, so this happened, was it yesterday or the day before? Let's see, I don't see a date. Where's our date? Ooh, September. Really? Am I that late?
Well, that's
Did you know about this? Because we didn't talk about this very much, did we? Yeah?
They said that they can, but I don't think they really actually done anything. This is like kind of when they were like people knew this was an issue. But
Yeah.
to the ICC.
It hit the news today, though. Why?
this is September.
Yeah, this is from September, but more about this hit the news today.
I think it's because like a lot's going on with like
This one.
Bangladesh sending their back
Yeah.
to Myanmar, and there's like a lot of
According to the ICC, we can prosecute.
yeah, but I don't think they did anything. They tried to like make it that like they would just stop, but I feel like it was like a threat, but then they haven't. Because then when that report came out and Myanmar said that everything's like false.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're considering denouncing. And then today, a whole bunch of stuff happened with this law group that's interested in defending them, right? So let's see what they're calling for, right? I've got this all set up funny kind. Okay. Yes, and we know that President Bush passed. That was big news. All right, law group calls for tribunal. Contracted by U.S. State Department. That's interesting. Criminal tribunal, and I'm wondering what we're talking about here. Reasonable grounds, the military committed crimes. Yes, we're aware. Washington-based, oh, you'll want to follow that, right? Washington-based Public International Law and Policy Group issued a report, right? So based on more than 1,000 interviews, holy cow, that's huge, right? That's a lot. What was our total of how many fled? Be good to figure out how much percentage of the total that is. Let's see what else we got here. International community is obliged to protect. Oh, we also had some other change as well that's new, and that we should also look up. Let's see if we can get to it. Let's go, the ICC, crimes of aggression. So the ICC just changed over July, and it's now coming into awareness. So we didn't have this before. It's weird. We have an international criminal court, but we didn't have the right to prosecute or even sue based on crimes of aggression. Like, this is really, it's amazing that we have to be so specific in law, in words and phrases, in order to be able to have action. So this is new. So now we've actually activated this attention. So now they can be called into any act of aggression. Now, what does that mean? Could we call them in for the kids? Probably, because we could consider it an act of aggression. What can we not consider active in aggression? Like, this incorporates a law, almost like we've just went like this and said, all right, our jurisdiction is this big, right? So Rome Statute agreed to activate the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over crimes of... All right, so that's pretty big. Let's see, where were we? No. Any further information on... No, I think that's all. Okay, so I think that's all I've seen in the news on your cases, right? We'll take the last maybe 10, 15 minutes to just, oh, your case got some development too, the Hawaiian case.
I need to know what to do with one thing.
Native Hawaii, Mauna Kea, and it was a new report that just came out. Let's see if I can find it. You know what? We'll wait until afterwards. I'll give it to you. It was something that was sent around by the an anthropologist out of the Department of UH Manoa. And it's in relation to Mauna Kea, and it's in relation to the development of the movement and other kinds of issues. Okay, so it'll be good to take a look at, right? Okay. All right, now we came into class talking about specifically Indigenous human rights and the environment, more specifically about land, right? And then from there, even though we have different kinds of cases, not specific Indigenous land rights, but other kinds of cases, we kind of adapted to take a look at the methods that we're using in adjudicating human rights case with groups of ethnic groups, right? So they can be Indigenous, they can be non-Indigenous, they can be refugees, like in your case with the Rohingya, right? But beginning, we started with defining Indigenous. Took a look at an article published by Ellen Lutz just after we finished the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, passed it, right? And she comes in and she says, you know, there's a lot of history in talking about the UN DRIP, especially the idea that we left the definition out of the declaration. We didn't even put it in, right? She said, we did that on purpose because we had a lot of groups that were arguing, especially in Africa, thinking about trying to determine whether certain populations in Africa are Indigenous or not Indigenous. No, they came back and they said, no, we're all Indigenous here, right? Yeah, we have some colonial history, but these groups here are Indigenous. And so this definition, it means something different for us because the large swaths of our population are this. Right? So we had to come up with a different way of referring to Indigenous people. Now, why do we even care about defining Indigenous people? U.S. government's really good at defining Indigenous people. They define them so well that they define other Indigenous people outside of the category. And little by little, the number of Indigenous people in the U.S. gets whittled down, right? We define them by blood quantum. Not everybody defines by blood quantum, right? In fact, we learned that almost every country has a different way of envisioning who are the Indigenous people and how to label them, right? Nicaragua, very interesting. If your group says, she's Mayagna, then you're Mayagna, right? Which leads to strange conclusions, especially for me when I have been lightly adopted by the Owastingni family of Mayagna. I'm not Mayagna, right? So we went on to read a famous report, right? How famous of a report is it? It's very famous. It's so famous that we're reading this still in 2018 as if every single word makes a difference, right? Because what he said about Indigenous people and the threats to them was just so huge around the world, right? So we come up with this issue about defining Indigenous. I'll tell you, this is a real hot topic, right? Think about Israel. Really, really critical about who they define as Indigenous and not Indigenous, right? So these kinds of issues about the specifics of the detail of the words written in these documents are just really critical, right? So UN DRIP, coming in with the UN perspective of definitions. See if we can find that again. UN definition of Indigenous. It's becoming easier to query, or was last I looked. HTML, PDF, that's what we want. All right, so we got our little PDF that says, I'm hoping. Boy, it's slow today. Oh, it's the wrong one. No wonder. All right, let's see. We'll try HTML. Nope, don't have it. All right. General definition, right? Okay, we're going to have to do more looking for that. Right. You do all have a link to it, right? Okay. So under the UN DRIP, we have a couple of things that are mentioning what our definition is, right? Okay. So among those things, we have to have a connection with the land. We have to have a connection with the natural resources, right? Still maintaining that connection, okay? We also have to have a distinct language, right? Not something that's generalizable all over the place, but something that's distinct and special just to that area. Same thing with religion, right? Distinct and special just to that area. Same thing with the cultural aspects as well, okay? So those are some pieces that are important. Now, we have a couple of other pieces that are a bit of a conundrum for us. One of them says, Indigenous people are the minority. They live in dominatory societies and they are the minority, right? Under that, what happens if they ever become the majority? Not Indigenous anymore, right? This is just so confusing, it's absurd, right? How can you lose your indigeneity only because you've become more dominant in the society? It's absurd. So there's some problems with this definition, right? Now, the ILO Convention number 169 is technically not a definition, but when we go to it, we see we have a couple of words here that are critical, right? So we've got our little piece here on Article 1, and though it does not say Indigenous people are defined as, it says this convention applies to. Why is this important? Because it's possible that some groups might claim this is not technically a definition. There are some groups that might claim this is technically a definition, right? And if you look at it, 2 points. Tribal peoples, independent countries whose social, cultural, economic conditions distinguish them from other sections of the national community, right? Similar, whose status is regulated wholly or partly by their customs or traditions or special laws or regulations. A little bit more wordy, isn't it? Not specific in terms of distinct religion, culture, and language, okay? And we go into the next section. Peoples in independent countries who are regarded as indigenous or tribal. See that word? So we've got indigenous or tribal, suggesting to us in the wording, like we got to pay attention to the words because this is law, suggesting in the wording that tribal peoples would be different in consideration from indigenous, right? Perhaps, okay? On account of their geographical region which the country belongs. At the time of conquest or colonization, establishment of the present state boundaries, who, irrespective of their legal status, retain some or all of their, retain some or all. That's another difference. You see that? So the prior UN definition says they got to maintain everything and they got to retain everything. This one says so long as they had it prior. Okay? Right. So both, however, go on to delineate special rights for people based on ethnicity, right? Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go. There's our UN definition. So let's go over this. Historical occupation of ancestral lands, or at least part of them, over time. At least part of them is kind of confusing. Is that clear to you? Still confusing, huh? Yeah. Common ancestry with the original occupation of these lands. What happens if we have more than one group? Uh-oh. Culture in general or in specific manifestations, shared behaviors, practices, plans, views, etc. Distinct language, right? Unique. Residents, and bless you, residents in certain parts of the country or in the region. That's another one that's kind of a little bit ambiguous, right? And distinct spirituality, okay? Pre-invasion and pre-colonial society is also somewhat problematic for some. We have also some recent recognition of the difficulties of physical removal. She was a prior rapporteur, not under the Indigenous group, but worked directly with the Indigenous people, Ms. Diaz, and talked about how difficult it is for an Indigenous group to return to lands. We have a case of the Wayu now living on the outskirts of Maracaibo in Venezuela. This is one of the ones that she's talking about, right? How we're returning. Talked a little bit about terra nullius. Do we remember that concept? didn't talk a ton about it, so I want to make sure that we go over it. What does terra nullius mean? It's Latin, right? Terra meaning land, nullius, what do you think? No one's land. So this is a idea that was used by the U.S. colonial government as they claimed lands in areas that weren't theirs, right? And all of Native America was considered terra nullius. So we have the tendency to proclaim lands that are indigenous as if they are not owned by anyone, thereby justifying us to be able to take it over, right? And manifest destiny, of course, is one of the things that we used to deal with that. Let me just look up something about that. Manifest destiny. Doesn't show it. Okay, we did have a young Native American girl go to the Pope within the last 2 years in Italy and make a plea for him to transform the tradition of manifest destiny and make a ruling on it, as if he could make some kind of a ruling about it being used improperly and terribly in the past. So we should keep our eyes out on that one to see what happens with that. So because those kinds of doctrines came down through the papal offices. We know that, right? That we used some of these doctrines to be able to justify Africa and taking over colonial areas, right? Okay, it was through the papal offices, all right. Okay. After we went through defining indigenous, then we went on to talk about international and national law and how we're adjudicating things, right? We took a look at the human rights structure. First, we said, if we have a case, and we all have cases, right? Everybody here has cases. If we all have a case, then beginning to adjudicate within our country, or China, right? Or Hawaii, call it another country. That we need to first exhaust all mechanisms within the country. Cannot go to any level outside of the country unless we've gone through all of the mechanisms, even if we don't like them, even if they're not nice to us, even if they exclude indigenous people. If we've not gone through all of the court systems within the country, they will send us back. Okay? So, got to go through all the court systems, go all the way as far as we can, be it Supreme Court or some of the national courts within some of the countries that we're talking about. Once we've done that, we remember we can go above, right? That's our next opportunity to go to a higher level. In the Americas, our next court at the higher level is called what? Do you remember what it is? Starts with an I. Inter-American Human Rights Court. Very good. Okay, and it's in Costa Rica. We even have something called the University of Peace that is also right next door. You can apply to the University of Peace and go study international human rights law in conjunction with the Inter-American Human Rights Court, right? Go check it out while you're in Panama. Okay. So we go to the Inter-American Human Rights Court. We get some kind of a judgment. Actually, first, before we enter court, we have a commission that comes out and checks out our case, right? Is it a legitimate case, right? We were in the middle of presenting all of our data to the state when the Inter-American Human Rights Court sent their commission to check in on Awastingni. Are they in the middle of the land titling project? Because that was part of the case, right? Remember, they said, yeah, Nicaragua, you don't want to do that, but you're going to have to, right? So they come in, check up on how we're doing. Are we keeping up with what they expected? Yes, we are. And we keep going down the road, right? Now, we satisfied what we wanted to do. We acquired land rights for the indigenous people in the area. Did we finish? Really? What work do we still have to do? What is the biggest challenge the Mayagna have on a daily basis, and the Miskitu for that matter? And your friends in Panama will have the same. Yeah, they got title, but what? What about all the colonists, right? Oh, a lot of colonists too. So the next step for us, even though we've satisfied the land rights case and we've satisfied the court case from the Inter-American Human Rights Court, we need to get these colonists out of there because they're cutting down all the trees, they're killing the indigenous people, right? They're taking their lands, they're making everything that we worked for disappear. So if we don't keep pushing on this, it's going to be like we just took a whole bunch of steps backwards, right? We satisfied their agenda, although we didn't accomplish anything. Oh, well, right? So instead, we got to keep going. That means back in court. That means Nicaragua, as part of their land that they had, the land law that they had to write in the last phase of land titling was going to be decolonization. This was part of what was mandated by the court. So they wrote into law, they said, okay, when you get your title, you have 6 months. Within that 6 months period, you should be provided with the means of and the action of decolonization. None of the lands are able to be sold. Therefore, anybody that's illegal has to be removed, okay? And yet, we're still stuck. So, now we're stuck. We're stuck in this phase of decolonization. What should we do next? What do you think? What should we do? Follow what we've done. What should we do next? Gosh darn it, they're not keeping up to their end of the bargain, right? What do you do when that happens? Back to court, right? Yeah, we got to go back to court because they said within 6 months, and we've got every single land case that hasn't happened within 6 months. None of them. That means they're responsible for correcting all of them, right? So, got to go back to court to finish up, right? What happens if we get all the way through things and we still can't get that decolonization to happen? Our regional court system is not supporting us where it could, right? This is hypothetical, right? Kind of, right? We're still stuck in this. So our regional court is not supporting us, not getting us that decolonization that was guaranteed by law, that they even said was guaranteed by law. Now where do we go? From the regional courts, we go up, not down, right? Up. So where's up? After our regional court? The higher courts. So we've got the UN, right? We can go in and we can have some kind of an NGO or a nation state make some kind of a motion and have some kind of a resolution voted on or something like that, right? General Assembly, Security Council, something like that, but those are really difficult. We could maybe propose that the International Criminal Court take it on as if it's a criminal case, an assault against the indigenous people. More often, though, we're going into the International Criminal Court, the ICC, out of The Hague, independent, right? We can submit cases if we're an NGO, right? Interesting conundrum with Israel. Let's see if I can bring it up. ICC unable to rule Palestine. I don't know where we're going with this one, but so we filed war crimes with the ICC against Israel, Palestine did, and now we think that they might not be able to rule on Palestine because it's not a nation state. So we're concerned about jurisdiction and we're still muddled in this conundrum. So this is an example of what can happen, right? Okay. Talked a little bit about our structures here, and we have an outline with all of our links to the different courts, right? You look at the regional courts here and the briefs, Eastern Europe, Arab states. This is interesting. Since February 2015, there were 14 states that were parties to the Arab Charter. And we've also got a special case of Sharia law that's being able to be addressed by the League of Arab States because that's their cultural aspects. Okay? Asia, we have a separate commission on indigenous human rights there. I don't know, maybe the Rohingya are coming out of this court. This might be possible that in fact, it looks like it, right? Wonder, let's take a look. Navigate to, let's see, I don't see any kind of, see if we can find the Rohingya case. Myanmar. Archive, Human Rights, Environmental Protection. No, I don't see anything about the Myanmar and the Rohingya in here. They should be under this jurisdiction, but maybe there's some kind of exception that they've made. Okay, global courts, we've got our links there. All right. From there, we move on to talking about objectives of documentation. And we read a little bit about principles for engagement with Indigenous people. Really nice piece, if you remember that one, right? We took a look at the Awastingni methods in terms of identifying land areas and land claims, characterization of the population. This is what you're doing in Panama, right? Description of the history of the land claim. Indicators of use, and then having to go in to talk about the population. For these guys, we remember that it was critical that they were dependent on the land. Being able to prove how much they're using of the land is an important thing. Similar case came out about Molokai. There was a study that was done on how many families on Molokai, I want to say. Also another one on the Big Island as well. But the ones on the Molokai was studying the percentage of natural resources that were relied upon by household. So you can then use that in the same way that we used it with Awastingni to argue for their rights to fishing, their rights to parklands, their rights to other kinds of resources, right? Looking at the discussion of NOAA's expansion of the Humpback National Wildlife Refuge, that might be something of value. So link those two up. Okay, all right. Took a look at talking about developing an oral history of a land claim and how we're going to go through developing historical data, working with elders, right? Involving elders in our work. We talked about developing groups of people to interview in focus groups, right? We said we needed to break down male versus female. Oftentimes, especially in traditional communities, we don't have that openness to be able to talk to both in the same setting, right? So we are oftentimes separating off to have special focus groups with specific people, right? All right. So before we get further into the methods here, I wanted to remind everybody that the place that we started off with Awastingni was in catching a violation of their human rights, one way or another, right? So we caught a violation of their human rights, opened up a case, and then we find that in order to address the issues that the case is based in, we're going to have to write a law first, right? So if you remember, the first thing that we did was to write a law on how to document land rights, to write a law on who we need to talk to. And in order to do that, we had to go community to community, spending upwards of a couple of weeks in each group, in each area, right? Asking people what they wanted as a part of that law. Their input in this made everything for the success. Had they not had input, had we had people just come from the outside and say, here's how you do it, go for it, and write the law and put it into action, it would have been a lot more difficult to do, right? Some of the uniqueness of this law is that they chose to have each territory decide on their own who stays and who goes out of the colonists. That's interesting. We could have written a law that said, everybody that's illegal, gotta go, because this is inalienable indigenous land. Always will be theirs, can't ever be anybody else's. But when we did the consultation, they said, well, you know, there's some people that are actually okay here, and we're okay with their staying. So while we would have expected to write out all colonists away from those rights, they wanted to incorporate the sovereignty or autonomy, actually maybe autonomy of each territory to decide for themselves. I'm not sure what's going on in Panama. You would have to look at the specifics of their new laws on land. Almost was wondering if they had even taken that first step of doing the land law first, and then or if they had done the indigenous land rights cases first and are coming back up with a law.
No, I don't know. All they use is vague.
Okay, I can't tell either, so I see what you're dealing with. So it's real unclear. And while they tout some of those successes, like what we saw today about the news of the Kuna, there's no discussion about the other.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Okay, so we felt that the law was the first thing that had to happen, and that was a way of bringing in people's voices into law and the process and to the methods. Okay. From there, we went obviously to meet with the ministries. Can't start talking about these kinds of things that are ultimately going to be what you could say an aggressive assault on the state, right? Just the Basuwas, which we know was completely titled to indigenous people, is 17% of the country. If you look at the autonomous zone, it's half. So if we're talking about titling an area that's in the autonomous zone and any other territories that fall thereafter, we're talking about titling half of the country to indigenous people as if it's sovereign and autonomous. And that's a global assault on the country of Nicaragua when you think about it, right? So had we not gone to the government first, it would be as if we were traitors and trying to go to war with Nicaragua, right? But meeting with government and talking with the institutions and ministries, from the Ministry of Natural Resources all the way to the Ministry of those entitled with ethnic groups, then we have an opportunity to address those concerns of the government in such a way that this is going to be a successful process for everybody, right? Okay. Then involving the local population. That was weird. That was weird. We had times where we went into the territories and we came in and we say, we're here to help you with land rights. And they said, what's the problem? We said, well, you know, there's this declared park. And the first reaction was, and we weren't even from the government, the first reaction was, far be it from you to come over to us on our lands and tell us what's a park and what's not a park. These have been our lands for thousands of years, right? So our first encounter of working with the indigenous people, of trying to explain to them that we were there just for the purpose of trying to get land rights in their hands, was conflictive. Just the thought that they had to fight for land rights was an issue, because they felt that they didn't have to. Their rights should be defended and stood up for, right? So that first meeting was difficult almost in every case, until we got all of our projects running and people knew who we were and what we were doing, right? All right. After that, we come in and propose a participatory methodology. The group of the people that I worked with in Mayagna and the Miskitu don't have much of a experience of participatory methodologies. Their experience is what we call typical of development, in that they will have people come into their territories and tell them what's going to happen. People don't come in and ask what's important to you. People don't come in and listen. What's on your agenda and why? What are you fighting for and why? Right? So for them to experience individuals coming to them and talking about land rights and asking for their participation is a little bit unusual. You might see that in the field in Panama. You might see people, this is weird, right? But it was exactly what needed to happen, right? Can't do any of this kind of work without their steering everything, okay? Including the methods, right? I don't know anything about the rainforest. I don't know what species are there. I don't know what they take out of the rainforest. I don't know what they do with it, right? I don't know what they sell, what they consume. I can't possibly know, right? I don't even know the scientific terms for these things, right? All I can get are the Mayagna names for some of these species. So for me to try and assert any kind of knowledge base is silly, right? They're the ones. So they're the ones that know what we need to track, what's important for us to demonstrate to the government as being used, right? Can't be from the ideas of an outsider, right? Now, developing a database. This is probably one of the most difficult pieces and the most irritating pieces and difficult to maintain, right? Because if we have a database, the database is going to be on incidents of violations. And if we're going to try and maintain our human rights and continue to defend our human rights, we got to maintain a database as early as we can start, right? And it's going to accrue, right? It's going to accumulate and get more. So just like those cases for the kids, there's more of them. Once we get a database of all the different centers, even the centers that were closed, we got a list of the centers that are closed, a list of the centers that are open. What are the violations that are happening at each one? How many cases of this at this one? How many cases of this at that one? It's a lot of information, right? But if we don't have that information right there, when we're going into court, we can't answer some of those questions that are critical. And all of those details of those specific statistics are needed in court, right? As is all the evidence. So we got to maintain a database. If we don't have a database, if we're not maintaining a database, we're going to have to stop after our first big intervention in trying to protect their human rights. All right. Then we need to think about research assistance. I can have a great time bringing all my students into the field as research assistants. Wouldn't that be awesome? But I also should, right, offer you to come on as volunteers and really hire the local people, yeah? Help support their claim, help support their work, help support the legitimacy of their work by employing them, right? In fact, the World Bank sponsored all of the Awastingni projects. So for that purposes, all the people that participated in that project were paid for by the World Bank, employed by the World Bank as if they were contractors. Well, they were Indigenous researchers, right? So, got to do that socioeconomic study, got to check out their finances because their claims to poverty might have more to do with the acceptability of their land claim, right? If we say they're so poor, this was the case, right? They're so poor, they only have $800 a year that they make, a year, right? And if that's the case, we can see that their lack of land ownership is threatening, right? Going further, if we then say that 75% of everything they consume in their household, right, from water to juice to trees to plants, that is what they depend on for 75% of all their consumption comes from the forest, then it's a lot easier to defend. right? If they're wealthy, harder to defend. Kind of weird, isn't it? They got to be poor in order for us to be able to, well, in most cases, right? Or we would have cases with massive amounts of conflict, right? Like we do in the Middle East. Okay. So we're training our elected research assistants. Remember that they're elected. If we choose them, it's not being chosen by the community, so it's a different kind of choice, right? And we're having our territorial and regional meetings where we're talking about what we're up to. We're training people, having them talk with their community members. We're picking up our satellite and radar imagery, and it's important that it's over time, right? If we're able to take an image 1 year, again 5 years later, or even 1 year later, and keep doing it all the way down for 20 years, or every 5 years, every 10 years, some measured level of the same kind of increment of timing, right? We're able to then get into the statistics and see the land coverage and notice where it's been depleted, right? Notice where the forests are being cut. So for us, it was very easy. All we needed to do was find the GPS points of all of the colonist towns, right? Make a map, a layer on GIS of those colonist towns, layer it over on top of the satellite imagery, right? See the changes over time. How many people know about story maps? Oh, good. Yes, you're all learning about story maps. Have you done them? Have you made story maps? No? Yes, you guys have, but not everybody has. Okay. That's an example of what we can use in a story map. We can take those satellite images, right, and see over time even the development of new colonist town and the development of new opening of the forest. Or, get this, we can even take a project that's supposedly blanketing this whole entire area and see where we might have activities versus not activities. If it's the only project in the area and it's starting to affect the land coverage, you see what I mean? It's pretty amazing what we can do with satellite imagery, especially with those kinds of story maps. All right, training field researchers in GPS and cognitive mapping. We got to have an idea about what their territory looks like before we send everybody out into the field. So in order to do that, we're going to have to develop that map that's based in their mind, right? Who are the best people to develop that kind of map? Hunter people, fishermen, right? People that are making use of the trees, collecting for medicinal plants, live animals even, right? Best hunter in all of Awastingni was a female. Pretty cool. Why was she the best hunter? Her husband had been killed in that 10-year war, right? And she was responsible for a whole bunch of kids. And she went out and hunted so well that a lot of what she caught was distributed around the community and fed the entire community, right? So good for us to make sure that we get both the male side of land use and also the female side of land use. So did a lot for gender sensitivity in that regard, right? Remember where we were inviting women to the meetings and they were only staying on the outside of the buildings and not coming inside, right? As a cultural measure. So had special meetings just with women. Then in the end, we finalize our plan, right? Boy, that was a lot though, because if everybody's going to come together and develop the plan together, that means everybody has to have an idea about all of the statistics. That means if we're going to count up how many board feet came out of every single household, we need to sit down with all the researchers and teach them how to count it up and teach them how to get all the data together and then make sense of the data. So the analysis process is something that happens with all of us, right? And it happens with the entire community together. So we're taking a look at all the data together and making a group analysis about what it meant and why it's like that. Very enlightening because obviously the researcher doesn't always know, right? And then since we finalize our plan, our claim, Awastingni said, we have 150,000 acres. That's our claim. right? And we put our plan into the government, and the government came back and they said, what are we going to do about all the crossing claims, right? You remember the maps, right? The crossing claims. Oh no. So we had to go into another section after completing this that we called conflict resolution. And in conflict resolution, we had to come together, all the neighbors that had conflicts, and try and come up with a resolution. Either you take some land, I'll take this land, or no, it's all yours, or no, it's all mine, or you pay us for this. Some kind of resolution, right? And if we don't, then what? We go to court. And all the stuff that we've been doing now is an official court report as to our specific claim. And it might be up to the court to decide. And that's what they did. If you remember the first time they went to court, they did not have the colonist communities on the map. Do you remember that? And they sent us back. They said, well, this isn't going to work. You got to have all the communities on the map. You can't just like not put what you don't want there, right? So we had to go back and we had to put all the communities on the court, go through the conflict resolution, didn't resolve it. One group called 10 comunidades, means 10 communities, right? And another one just to the south and the west didn't agree. So we all had to go to court. And they got 90,000 hectares, not 150. They lost 60,000 hectares in a crossing claim. I wish I could give them their complete claim, but at the same time, they developed their Nicaraguan laws on how to adjudicate issues of conflict, and they followed all of the Nicaraguan laws according to adjudicating conflict, and that's what they ended up with. So they accepted it. They accepted them taking away 60,000 hectares from their total claim. They still got some, right? But their expectation also was that they would be eligible for decolonization within 6 months, and that didn't happen. So I'll tell you what has happened for Awastingi. Because decolonization didn't happen, because others were on their lands cutting the trees, what do you think happened? Let's take a guess. Do you remember the cases of the tragedy of the commons? Some of you, yeah? Okay, so some have gotten the discussion about the tragedy of the commons, right? And what do you remember was the problem of the tragedy? We had only a finite amount of commons, right? And the commons was, our example was the commons in England, right? Where we have grazing lands. So we're talking about grazing animals. And in the conflict on the tragedy of commons, we find what? What is it that happens? We find out we're all selfish. So very selfish that we do what? We use up all the precious resources. And once one person starts to do it, then what happens? Ollie, income free. We all go for it, right? So if now we know that we have not decolonized Awastingi, what do you think has happened to Awastingi? A lot of their lands are cut down. Okay? Here's what happened real specifically. Part of the law that was written says that indigenous lands is inalienable. What does that mean? Can't alienate it, partition it, and kick it off. So it means you can't sell. It means once it's in indigenous lands, you can't ever sell it. Can't ever go anywhere else other than to the next generation, right? Instead, we're seeing people selling indigenous land just to get the money. Because if they don't, the trees are disappearing and they're all gone, right? So now we're in a tragedy of the commons because we didn't decolonize. Because we didn't take out the illegals that we said was illegal. We developed a law, we called them illegals and said, this is what they look like. This is how you can tell what they look like, right? And then we didn't do anything with them. And now because we didn't do anything with them, corruption has taken over, right? And now those things that were called inalienable are all being sold. And now the Awastini territory sitting around pointing their fingers at each other saying, it's your fault, you did this, it's your fault, you did this, it's your fault, you did this. And now we have conflict within the territory because we didn't decolonize, because we said we were gonna, right? So this is a bit of a problem that we have now, and it looks like we're gonna end up going back to court. And it looks like in the process, highly likely that Awastini is going to develop a new methodology for the world on how to decolonize if somebody doesn't do it first, right? But it'll be a fascinating thing to see what happens.
How does decolonizing guarantee like that land that is returned to the people like is going to be maintained?
Aha!
How is it guaranteed that they're not going to do the same?
Aha! So how is it that we can guarantee that once the indigenous people get land rights, that they're not going to do the exact same thing, right? And whatnot. Well, one of the things that we're looking at is we do have a lot of people that are concerned about that. And they said, well, yeah, we want them to have land rights, but we don't want them to have too much control, right? We got people in parks. This is a big, lot more convenient when we can title areas that are in parks, because then we layer on the park thing that says authoritatively what you can and cannot do. Then we have people in parks that now all of a sudden are told that they can't go hunt their animals to eat, right? So this is becoming a conflict. So part of the support is to support their ownership, but also to further their support in money making. So just like the Nature Conservancy found out, when they focus only on land rights and don't address the human side of it, there's a disconnect, right? But when we work on supporting the economics, right, rather than tell them what they can't do, right, and support what they've got going, then it's a lot easier down the road. That combined with the fact that if they have rights to their defined areas and it's decolonized and they have full rights, they do have a tendency more often to be sustainable because that's all they have, you know, and they're treating it as if you would treat a 20-acre farm. This is all I have, this is what I'm going to use, I'm going to max out and make it nice and take care of it, right? We don't have a lot of examples of indigenous people destroying so much, right? We have some.
I remember I think your class last year.
Yeah.
You brought up one of your ex-friends. I don't know that like was using the example of like how you didn't like that everybody else is making money off of it, and so you wanted to make money off of it.
Right. And we had the discussion, right? And the discussion was, hey, if the colonists are cutting the trees down, I want to be able to cut the trees down, right? And so that was the draw was, if they are, then I want to. So it's really a classic tragedy of the commons because we've got other people that are competing for the same resource and others that have a different behavior. Now, within, let's say, just Awastini, if we had it decolonized, they do have their own way of regulating resources within their territory. There are recognized family areas for growing crops. So you'll have individual use, but then you have collective ownership to the whole thing. So we see more of a tendency to protect it, with the exception of colonists being around. When we have colonists around, then all things kind of go south or whatever have you, right? Into a different direction. Okay? All right. So, talked about colonists and decolonization. But we also talked about another kind of colonialism and another kind of decolonization, and various types. Okay, so when we have decolonization of land, we were talking about removing of colonists. Deoccupation, demilitarization is something similar, right? But we also have this concept of the colonization of the culture, decolonization of the culture in terms of colonization of the mind. And that is something that is really interesting, that is new, going on around Polynesia, Hawaii specifically. There's a lot of work being done on decolonization of the mind and the experience of having been colonized. So a lot of it has to do with literature, right? And writing in forms of protest, right? Including even children's books. Remember we talked about this? Children's books and song and those kinds of things, with the cultural aspects that we use to support our culture. When we are relying on things from mainstream culture, we're not getting that reinforcement from the base, right? An example being now Hawaii is full of all kinds of children's books that are specifically dealing with Hawaiian concepts, from poi to surfing to those kinds of things, right? And now we have new children's books that are coming out of other areas of Polynesia, Tahiti, Fiji, Samoa, and more specifically related to those geographical areas for those children. And this being one of the things that we're starting as a way of decolonizing the mind, right? We can colonize the mind through our children's books, and we see examples of that all around the world, right? I mean, we can specifically colonize the mind, right? And we might even say that a lot of our history that we have of our country colonizes the mind, right? If you look at what we learn, we don't always learn the truth, right? One of the things we've talked a fair amount about. Okay. Also, we talked about triangulation of data as being a way to reinforce the statistics that we're bringing in our cases. So if we can get multiple sources of data about the case, be it about the health of sterilization and those kinds of things, getting more cases around Canada or even other places in the world would help to reinforce that case as being a critical piece, right? All right. Ethnomapping. I love this one. Did anybody check out the Eco Project? Did you go to it? Yeah? Okay. Let me know if you find any kind of reviews on that, because I have yet to find an evaluation from that project or a report. And that's 8 years old, you know? I think they've got to report it on some of their work so far, but I haven't been able to find it. So if anybody finds it, send it on to me, right? So remapping Canada, because what did they miss? Place names, significant sites, right? Maybe even boundary areas that might be important. The gendered resource mapping was another one to bring that even into better light as it related to women, right? That women are making use of the landscape in different ways than men. So if we're going to think about trying to protect not just the male side of land rights, but also that female side, then we have to map in a way that is going to demonstrate their participation. And it might mean that we have to do a real close level of scale, right? Like, for example, we might have a farm, and the farm might say, well, here's a farm, right? But the female use of the farm might be the rows of trees that are going all around the outside of the farm, or a line that goes this way. And so by just mapping the farm, we've missed that special mapping of just that female attribute, right? So this would lend a lot of credence to mapping, especially with women. We didn't do that in policy. Oh my gosh. Thinking about it now, are you guys going to be doing mapping just with women? I don't know. I've never seen any mapping just with women ever being done anywhere.
We're doing more mapping of like natural resources.
Yeah, but you're still gonna, I mean, like, how are you gonna find them? You gotta talk to people, right? So, you're only gonna talk to men? Right? Do you know why I only talk to men? Not because that's my preference, no. The reason why I was only able to talk to the men in the community, right, was because, why? Women didn't speak Spanish, right? So oftentimes we miss their voice on the map or any other kind of study because we don't speak that language. So are you going to get contact with the women? I want to find out like what your experience is going to be, because I'm guessing that you're not going to have a lot of contact with women. And that might be frustrating to you. I would suspect, it would be frustrating to me, that we're missing that voice. Having missed it, I feel bad, right? Okay. So, body language, how we talk. Right? All right. Are we, oh my gosh, we're getting close to the end. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else that I want to. Please take a look at both of those handbooks. Remember, we had one handbook that was for the parliamentarians, and then there was another one that I posted up as a reading on Moodle. Okay, so make sure that you get to those. Pardon?
They don't open.
Okay, all right, well, all right, I'll address that before next class. I'll make it openable, all right? I might have you do some assessment of, right, Thank you.